G'day, it's Mike Bird here for the Nazareth to Nicaea podcast and vodcast. This week, I'm talking to Professor Mark Goodaker from Duke University. Professor Goodaker is a great bloke. He really is. He's probably one of the most popular New Testament scholars around. He really is a lovely guy. He's a great scholar of the New Testament, specializing in Christian origins, particularly well known for his work on the synoptic problem, which is, I think, practically peerless in what he's done. He really does some great work. You can check out his introduction on the synoptic problem. Mark is also interested in Jesus in film, and he teaches in that area at Duke University. And Mark and I sit down and we have a discussion about the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. And we have a really good discussion of that. We talk about what it says about our culture and religion. We talk about also its representation of Jesus. What is the type of Jesus that emerges from the musical Jesus Christ Superstar? Is it a sort of entertaining blasphemy, or is there something in the show that really does excite interest in Jesus? And the musical Jesus Christ Superstar shows that despite it being a 2,000-year-old story and the show itself a 50-year-old production, it really does have something going for it. Well, that's what we discussed in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, when you're finished, don't forget to subscribe, like, leave a comment and a review, and share. Otherwise, here's me and Professor Mark Goodaker talking about Jesus Christ Superstar. And here I am, joined with Professor Mark Goodaker from Duke University. We're discussing when this whole thing began. No talk of God then. We called you a man, but believe me, my admiration for you hasn't died. No, I'm not talking about Professor Goodaker. I'm talking about Jesus from the opening song of the hit musical Jesus Christ Superstar, which I believe we are now celebrating the 50th anniversary of is it the anniversary of the production or the anniversary of the release of the album? I can't remember, Mark. Do you remember?
I think it has to be I haven't checked the dates, but I think it must be the anniversary of the first production, because the soundtrack album I think came out in 1970. So okay. I think we're looking back to 71 here.
Okay, excellent. And this was a kind of a big event, when it came out. Mm-hmm. I think it initially came out. I mean, I've read the biography of Andrew Lloyd Webber, and when it first came out, there was a bit of controversy because they brought out just the one song. Mm-hmm. which was Jesus Christ Superstar, which had a little bit of controversy. Jesus Christ Superstar. Who do you think you really are?
Yeah, Murray Head, if I remember rightly, as well.
Yes, Murray Head singing that.
Great, fabulous performance.
Yeah, and that came out, and then it was successful. The place where it started being successful, I don't know whether you know this, Mark. The place where it first hit the top 10 was in Brazil.
Nice.
So it kind of initially took off in Brazil, of all places, and then it just spread around the world, and it became this hit song. They built the whole concept album around it, stage production, and then eventually all the way becoming into a 1973 movie. And I mean, the only way to describe the sensation around it, it's kind of like what Hamilton has been in the last 5 years. If you know the musical Hamilton, that's been a big hit. And Disney put the stage production on its Disney Plus channel, but it was a big deal. Now this happened. I don't know how old you are, Mark, and I won't attempt to guess, but this all happened for me just before I was born, so I wasn't around all that time. So were you a wee young nipper around this time, Mark?
Yeah, I'm clearly a little bit older than you, because I remember people in primary school in England singing and there's some rude words to it, which because yours is probably a clean podcast, I better not repeat them, but and some people would find them a bit mocking, but yes, I grew up aware of it very much so. Yeah.
And it's always been a hit show. Every time they do a new production of it, it always plays to sell out crowds. And there's been numerous productions over the year. years. The first one I saw was in 1992, which had John Farnham as Jesus. He's an Australian pop singer. I don't know if you know who this is. It had Angry Anderson as Herod, who was a kind of short, bald, kind of, hard rock singer. I think it had John Stevens as Judas and Kate Sobrano as Mary Magdalene. These are all kind of Australian pop stars from the 1990s.
Fantastic.
And maybe completely meaningless. But I loved it. I thought it was a great show. And as a teenager and as a young man, I was a bit peculiar because I really loved musical theatre. I loved Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera. And even when I joined the army, all the other soldiers had their own room, mostly covered in pictures of naked women. I had my wall picture covered with pictures of Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, and once the platoon commander came into my office and my room, kind of looks around and he goes, "Private Bird, you are a very, very weird little man." So that was my background. A big love for musical theatre. And in Australia, even though Australia is, I think, fairly secular and kind of has an ambivalent relationship with religion, whenever the show comes out, it always plays to packed audiences. Mark, why do you think this show is so popular amongst religious and non-religious people? Why do you think this musical is so popular?
It's a tough one, really, because you'd have thought it would be an absolute disaster if someone pitched you, "I'm going to do a musical." If you imagine, back in like 1970, and you're pitching to someone, "I'm going to do a musical, and the musical is going to be about Jesus, and it's going to do the whole thing. We're going to do the crucifixion and everything." I mean, that sounds like a comedy sketch parody if you think of it like that. I mean, it seems like a kind of crazy idea, but I think there are a couple of reasons why it really works. One is that the tunes are just so good. They are so memorable. I mean, whatever you think of Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's impossible to get his tunes out of your head. He's just a really, really gifted songwriter. And then I think throw into that, if you're going to have a musical, and actually, it's not really musical, is it? We should really call it a rock opera because, it doesn't have any kind of intervening dialogue or anything. But anyway, that's a sort of, point for purists. But I think the other thing is, it's very hard watching a musical. If you've ever been to a live musical, if you don't know what's going on, you really need a story that is easy to follow and that's enjoyable. And there are some wonderful, wonderful musicals and pop operas over the years that have fantastic tunes that have tanked on Broadway and tanked on the West End because the stories are impenetrable, Yeah. But the thing about, right. Yeah. Well, I adore chess. Absolutely adore it. I mean, I was at the premiere in the Barbican in 1984, met Tim Rice and Bjorn and Benny from ABBA and the whole thing. But the problem is the story's utterly impenetrable. No one's got a clue what's going on. And what's more, you then don't really care about it. So yeah, so it's it is a real issue. So I think the thing is, you can work out what's going on in Jesus Christ Superstar. And in fact, the song you quoted from at the beginning, Judas's "Too Much Heaven on Their Minds," that is a work of real genius. That is where you see Tim Rice's lyrics at their best, because they basically, in the process of a 4-minute, 5-minute song, however long it is, manage to do all the exposition that you need. I mean, it's all there. I mean, like, say for the sake of argument, you knew nothing of the Jesus story, which is difficult to imagine for most people living in the West these days, but say you knew barely anything. Judas comes on, sings that song, and he basically sets up everything that you need to know, and then boom, and you're in. So, and you don't even have to have a narrator, clunky narrator standing up and doing stuff. You just go in, So I think it's a story that you can follow that's intriguing and fascinating at the same time as fantastic songs. That's really what's going on, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. It's got punchy tunes. It's got some great lyrics. It's told from the perspective of Judas, which is, he's a bit of an anti-hero. You've got a kind of like an anti-establishment Jesus, which kind of, it's good at the end of the 1960s, but that's all coming that we've all had that. Or someone described to me the 1970s was like the 1960s, but without the virtue. Um, so maybe it's that nice little transition. It's got a hint of blasphemy as well to make it controversial, and means it's not just going to be, singing to the choir. But yeah, I think that's all the reasons why it's been very, very popular.
And I think that if I can pick up on that term, a hint of, that is actually one of the reasons why it works, because if you think to Jesus, I mean, if moving to the world of Jesus films, if you think of things that have been less successful, like Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ, most people didn't see that as having a hint of blasphemy or being a little irreverent. They saw it as being actually offensive. I actually think the film's got some qualities, and I think there's lots of it's a flawed masterpiece in many ways, but that's an issue for another day. But I think with Jesus Christ Superstar, there's lots of things where Christians going to it would think, oh, I'm not sure about that bit, and oh, I'm a bit worried about that bit. But it's not out and out offensive. It's not it has these bits of irreverence, but it's not really offensive. So I think if it had been really, really upsetting to many Christians, and I think it would never have done as well as it has done, because the controversy actually helped sell it rather than hindering it. With Scorsese, or it basically pushed that bar, so it pushed it so far that you end up with a situation where Christians are going to go nowhere near it. And Jesus Christ Superstar doesn't have that. You've got many, many Christians who just love the thing.
Yeah. And there was, I think in the early days, before the stage production was done, there was a group of nuns who tried to put on a concert about it, but actually got like a court order preventing them. And I think you were interviewed for an article recently, and I think it was about a group. Where were they? Were they like in Indiana or somewhere?
Yeah, they were in a prison somewhere, I think, weren't they? I think they're performing in prison.
In somewhere. Prison?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But there was some group who was putting on a production, but they had to call it a dress rehearsal because they didn't have the rights to perform the show or something.
Right. Yeah.
So, but even the others, even a group of nuns were performing this stuff. And I mean, I think you're right. It's got a few things where the odd theologian may go, it's a little bit. That's not.
Oh, there's all sorts for people like us. Like, I mean, we're both New Testament scholars, and there's all the kind of things that we go, oh no, not that cliche, and oh no, not that cliche. But I mean, most people don't worry about things in the way that we do as New Testament scholars. They don't rake over the text, and and so all the stuff that we might be worried about, most people that that they're not we.
Exactly. And I mean, if you add to that the music, the story, some great characters, it makes for a great show. My favorite part of the show actually probably is maybe least theologically orthodox, and that's the song Gethsemane, because I think it is one of the best displays of Jesus as a real human figure. Okay, really experiencing mental anguish. Experiencing self-doubt, even experiencing a certain doubt of God, like he's going to the cross, but he's kind of not sure why anymore. And I've been doing this for 3 years. What I started, what you started.
But fantastic.
And he's wrestling almost with his own doubt. Am I really who I think I am? And yet at the end of it, he still kind of does it a little bit with an air of resignation, but that sense of the necessity, or we would say in Greek, the day, that he still must go through this crucible of suffering. And I think it's one of the best depictions of the humanity of Jesus, particularly acute, because in the circles I travel in, they've got no problem with Jesus as divine. It's his humanity that tends to be sometimes less real. And I mean, that's my favorite part of the show, because it shows the real raw humanity of Jesus in a very, I think, a very moving way. And my favorite edition of it is either the Michael Crawford version or the Con Wilkinson, from Les Mis fame. He also sings, probably Con Wilkinson, you can find on YouTube. Probably his rendition of Gethsemane was my favorite part. I mean, do you have a favorite song from the show, Mark?
Well, so I agree with you 100% about Gethsemane, and by deliberately, having that choice to depict a very human Christ, it actually ends up making that scene moving in a way it rarely is in the history of Jesus films. I mean, it's very hard to make that scene moving, because you have to it's difficult to write it in such a way as to make it seem like Jesus genuinely has a choice. Because if you're watching it knowing that he's going to the cross anyway, how do you evoke to the viewer that Jesus is genuinely here trying to make a choice? Does he go ahead with it? And in the course of that song, you see Jesus making up his mind. And I adore the very, very traditional here, but I love the film version there with Ted Neely singing it. And the camera is above Jesus in that. So one of the things that you notice a lot in Jesus films is that the camera often gazes at Jesus with admiration and worship and reverence, including even often in Gethsemane. But what happens in Jesus Christ Superstar is the camera is looking down on Jesus. And so you see Jesus is almost like grasping for this kind of wants to grapple with God about it. So I totally agree. I think it's a very, very moving piece. Probably my favorite song in the whole thing. But I suppose if I were to choose something else that's a favorite, I think Heaven on Their Minds is probably pretty fantastic. I fell in love with that song as a teenager and used to play. We had the soundtrack album of the film at home. My mum and dad had it, and I used to play it over and over again. So I know pretty much every song off by heart. So I love that too. Tons of it. There's tons of it. There are very few moments where it nods, where it basically keeps the momentum going all the way through.
Yeah, my second favorite song is Simon Ziolotti's.
Oh,
that's kind of like
Christ, I love you. Did you see I wave? I believe in you and God, so tell me that I'm safe. Fantastic.
Yeah, and adding
I worry a little bit about.
Sorry, the bit which says just add a little bit of hatred at Rome. That's good. That gives us a little bit of the temptation to be the anti-imperial Jesus. Just find some others, find some villains that we can demonize. And that's how we'll do it. So that's my second favorite song. Yeah,
it's very clever. And in fact, in the film, you actually see Jesus's smile dissipate at the moment when he says another touch of hate at Rome. And that's the moment where Jesus, from loving the adoring crowd, suddenly is really troubled by it. I think that's a very clever moment. I adore the Last Supper as well. The really richly layered. I think it's pretty great. And I've never actually done this in publication yet, but one day I do actually want to quote the opening of that. Look at all my trials and tribulations, and the idea that the apostles all kind of sat round after Jesus had died and just published their own reminiscences. Of course, that's the kind of thing where we go, what? But that's kind of wonderful too.
Yeah. Well, Mark, do you have any thoughts on the 1973 film? Because as you look back at it now, it's definitely a product of its time.
Yeah.
I can't remember who played the character of Jesus, but it strikes me very much as what I would call, the Bee Gees Jesus, because this guy's voice is pretty high pitched.
It's fabulous,
and it strikes me as a little bit weird as I look at it now. But what do you think of the film? What's good about it? When you show it to students, what are their impressions of the film?
I adore. So I think that he's my favorite Jesus from Jesus Christ Superstar, Ted Neely, and it was astonishing that he got the role because Jeff Fenholt had been playing it on Broadway, and he was bitter for many, many years that he didn't get the call. And Ted Neely was his understudy. So they knew each other and they chose the understudy. Neither of them was a known, actor or singer or whatever. So I actually love the film. I think it's great. Like you say, very much a product of its time. It's got a very 70s look. It's kind of fun because they film it in Israel. And in a way that gets you the holy grail of Jesus films, because it is so difficult to film a Jesus film in Israel because modern day Israel doesn't look anything like it looked 20 years ago. Try going filming in Nazareth. Hopeless. You could go and film in Capernaum, but the bits of it that aren't like an archaeological dig, are kind of venerated by people. So That's why they always go these days to Morocco or Tunisia or occasionally to Spain. It's just really, really hard to pull it off. I mean, Pasolini wanted to film the Gospel according to St. Matthew in Israel. And there's this marvelous film where you actually watch him going around sites in Israel. He goes to Bethlehem, he goes to sites in Galilee and everything. And as he goes, he realizes that there is no way he can film that film in Israel. But the great thing about Jesus Christ Superstar, because its fundamental conceit is, here's a bunch of actors arriving in a bus to Israel. It doesn't matter that it looks different, and brilliant use of locations, actually. So I think it's a fantastic version, but some people don't like it. And I think this comes down to what your first experience of Jesus Christ Superstar is. So my first experience was the soundtrack album of the 1973 film, and was watching the 1973 film on TV. And I first saw it on TV, I would guess, in the late 70s, somewhere around there. And my mum and dad liked it. So we all sat down and watched it. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is so good. And I only after that went to my first production of it. And actually I found the first production I went to, it was in Liverpool in England. Went with my grandfather, who was a minister in the Church of England, but fairly liberal-minded on such things, and he absolutely loved Jesus Christ Superstar. So I went to see it with him, and I confess I was really disappointed by it, because I was measuring it against the version that I already knew really well from the film. But I did think, though, that it first occurred to me then, and I've thought this often in watching subsequent productions. If you do a stage show, you can do something different at the end. You can do something different with the resurrection, because the film ends on this very strange note where essentially Jesus is crucified, and after the crucifixion, you just get played out the instrumental song about the tomb. And you see the actors getting back on the bus, and off they go without Jesus. I'm not sure what they've done with, Ted Neely, but he's not getting back on the bus with them. They've all clearly been changed by the act that they've been involved in, but you have no resurrection scene. Unless some people think there's a silhouette of a shepherd you can see, and some people think that's maybe hinting at a resurrection. But when you have the musical, and I have no idea whether this is intentional on Tim Rice's and Andrew Lloyd Webber's part, but you're always going to have Jesus, along with all the other characters, do the curtain call. And so at that moment, whatever you've seen, you do see Jesus again, which you don't in the film. And the production that I'm referencing, that I went to see when I was a child, he comes back wearing this glorious kind of raiment. So you're thinking, oh, okay, so he lives on past it. And I think the emotional reaction then, as the crowd is simultaneously really excited about clapping this great performance they've seen, and they're seeing this Jesus in glorious raiment, it does actually produce a kind of almost like a spontaneous resurrection scene. And I think that gets to the heart of why some people struggle with the film so much, because it just ends on the down without the lift that you get whenever you see the thing live.
Yeah, I know one Christian theatre company, when they performed the song, they actually did a resurrection hymn at the end when the crowd comes out.
Yeah.
I think they sang I think they sang a Don Francisco song called "He's Alive." So that part of their encore was to do like a resurrection song at the end, which I thought was a good way of doing exactly what you've got there. Well,
interesting.
Mark, who is Jesus according to Jesus Christ Superstar? What's the gospel according to Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber? who is their Jesus? Or is it merely it's a bit of a Jesus, but then it depends on the specific production, the director, the company. But what's the Christology of this musical?
Well, the fun thing is that you're doing exactly there what Tim Rice is doing in the piece, and he's saying, who is Jesus? I mean, so famously in the song that you mentioned that starts the whole thing up, the song Superstar, that song is interrogating Jesus. It's Judas saying to Jesus, you know, who do you think you are? You know, so to that extent, I think the production has, it's not so much a low Christology as a Christology of asking questions. I mean, it's probably why some theologians and religious studies scholars like it, you know, people like us, because we like asking questions so much. Quite often, you know, people tease us for liking the questions more than the answers. So maybe that's one of the reasons that Jesus Christ Superstar is often popular with academics, because it just keeps asking these sort of questions, and it doesn't really come down very strongly one way or another. And I don't think, I mean, some people talk about having a really low Christology. I'm not sure if that's quite right. It seems to me more to have a Christology of asking questions. It's basically, its subtext is a modern person, a modern secular person asking questions about Jesus, and not necessarily questions. They're not accusing him. They're not attacking him. It's more a case of, what sense do I make of this? Which is why I think it still is open enough for Christians to watch and get something from. So, I mean, I suppose the thing which makes its Christology seem low is things like the scene where Jesus basically, and this is done well in the film, but the scene where Jesus gets just hounded by lots of people who want him to heal them, and he just can't cope with it. There's just and that idea of a Jesus who is overwhelmed by the crowds, rather than the Jesus that you see in the Gospels, who often celebrates the presence of crowds. I think that's where it gets its reputation for having quite a low Christology, as well as the other things we've mentioned, like the fact that in Gethsemane, he clearly has this real struggle, you know, mapped out. So I think it's on the low side, but it's also unusual. It doesn't fit neatly into our nicely constructed categories.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interrogative Christology. That's how I would call it. An interrogative.
Nice way of putting it. Yeah,
it's an interrogative. It wants you to ask questions about Jesus, but it does have a nice realist Christology, of which I think you could overlay it with some, you know, more divine themes if you wanted to. You know, what I find interesting, what I read, I think I read this in an article about Tim Rice, is he read the Gospels like about 30 times when he was writing the you know, the lyrics for this. So he really tried to absorb you know, the language and imagery of the Gospels. I mean, him and Lloyd Webber had done the Joseph musical, meant kind of like for school productions, you know, and so they found out there was a bit of traction doing biblical themes. But yeah, he really did absorb the Gospels. I have wondered whether the song "Heaven on Their Minds" it almost, for me, almost has a kind of Boltmanian theme to it, particularly when you get away. We're going to strip away the myth behind the man. I mean, I don't know whether Tim Rice was thinking of this, but it does have a kind of a demythologization kind of a theme. I mean, once you start using that language. And I tell my students, if rather than read copious amounts of Borman, just listen to the opening song of Jesus Christ Superstar, and you've pretty much got the gist of Boltman from reading that, to be honest. And I'd love to sit down with Tim Rice and ask him, did you ever read anything by Boltman? Did you read Boltman's Jesus and the Word? You know, which would have been probably the heyday of Boltman back in the 60s. Did you ever? So I'd love to do that. I don't know whether you know, Mark, but Tim Rice has been putting out a kind of biographical podcast talking about the various shows he's been involved in.
Yes.
And both the highs and
some unique material in there as well. There's some great stuff on chess that we were talking about earlier on. But
yes. Chess, great score, great concept.
Oh, the best.
But it was never a success as a stage production, although the concert version has done fairly well. The concert versions have done well.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Superstar. How have you, I mean, you teach a course on religion and film. How have your students responded when you've shown it to them? Is this kind of like something like something they've heard of, kind of like Fiddler on the Roof, or like I've heard of it, or but you know, I didn't know what it's about, or is this just part of their common consciousness now?
They mainly love it, which always makes me quite happy. That a lot of students, love musicals. So, you know, they understand the whole grammar of a musical. And I think because Andrew Lloyd Webber has gone on to do so many successful things that they actually have seen and enjoyed and all the rest of it, you actually get people that genuinely enjoy it. So the way I do it when I teach it is we do Godspell first, because Godspell is almost exactly contemporary in terms of the musical, and then film made in 1973, same year as Jesus Christ Superstar, and they generally hate it. And not always, there are some exceptions. Usually if someone's performed it at school or something like that, or they've been involved in some musical theatre that's done it, because Godspell's got some great songs as well. I personally really don't like it. It's one of the few, it actually makes my hair stand on end at some points because I find it so irritating. But anyway, most of my students are like that, and I try not to bias them before they watch it. And I always feel that you only have one chance at first impressions. So one of the things I love doing, I mean, last time I taught Jesus in film, we were doing it all over Zoom, and it's much harder to gauge these reactions. But the previous few times when I've taught the course, I do a class right at the beginning where I contrast a whole series of depictions of the cleansing of the temple scene, and good and bad. And you can actually put together like 5 or 6 back to back, and it's a wonderful way of just getting a really quick idea of how filmmaking has changed, how approaches to the subject matter have changed. But when you show them the cleansing of the temple from Jesus Christ Superstar, they generally laugh at the moment when Ted Neely comes in and says, my temple should be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. And I'm tempted to try singing, but I'm not going to, since this is being recorded. But they laugh not because they think it's sort of risible, but because it's so shocking. If you don't know what's coming, see, you and I know what's coming with that scene. We know that Jesus is going to hit that note. I'm really tempted to sing. I'm not going to, but he's going to hit that high note. But the students don't know that, a lot of them. So they see the whole thing come, and then they see Jesus, and then they hear that note, that falsetto note, and it's so shocking that but several of them say afterwards, wow, that was really powerful. So I actually asked them at the end of the course for a fun thing. This is not graded or anything like that. But for a fun thing, I also ask students at the end of the course to just put down their top 3 or 4 favorite Jesus films. And it varies a lot from student to student. But I would say consistently, there are quite a lot of people that would say Jesus Christ Superstar is one of their favorites. It's one of the ones that they go back to, and that includes people that have never seen it before. So it does have, after 50 years, an enduring appeal, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, part of me would like to see them do a remake, but then I remember that what they did with the movie Cats, and it kind of scares me, since the movie Cats was just awful. I mean, like crime against humanity, kind of awful. You know, I'm not a purist. You know, I don't mind a little bit of commercialization. But yeah, I mean, I'm terrified to what they did with Phantom. I mean, they had Gerard Butler playing the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera. But anyway, but yeah, I'd like to see. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the 1973 movie, but part of me I would like to see a remake before I pass away, just one more time.
I know what you mean. I would love to do it. I mean, I really enjoyed the recent version with John Legend playing Jesus and Alice Cooper playing Herod. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah,
I saw an absolute cracker. It was beautifully staged, and it really got a lot of people very excited about Jesus Christ Superstar again. It's not perfect, but there was some really enjoyable moves there, and that did make me think. I forget when that was now. It must be 4 or 5 years ago. But it made me think, you know, you really could do a successful new movie of this. So I actually personally would love to see it. I think it could be a success, but for all those reasons you say, it's a very difficult thing to pull off well. I mean, arguably Evita with Madonna in the role is as good as you can get, really. I don't know if you agree with that, but it's as good as you can get, probably, doing a film. I mean, Les Miserables is different composers and so on. But thinking through the sort of Lloyd Webber canon, I think Evita might be as good as you can get.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because it's funny, because for me, I think we're a bit different on this, but for me, the 1973 film, is the definitive version, and everything else for me compares to that. But that's partly just autobiographical. It's just because that's what I experienced as a child and a teenager and so on. So it would have to do a lot to raise, to get up to that for me. But I would love to see someone try.
Yeah, I agree. I think having a crack at it would be a good idea. I don't know what Lloyd Webber's been doing during the pandemic, but this might be a good pet project for him to do. I'd have to say Alice Cooper was my favorite Herod of all time.
He's good, isn't he?
He's good. I've seen a lot of Herods. Interesting fact about Herod's song, Lloyd Webber was really nervous about the first production of it. And the producer, I think his name was Aussie guy, was Harry Seckham, I think was his name. And he said, wait till they get to Herod's song, which has kind of got like a Broadway, it's like a vaudeville kind of cabaret number. Yeah. It's a little bit quirky. And during the first production of Jesus Christ Superstar, I think it was on Broadway, the audience was fairly subdued. There was kind of, moderate clapping every now and then.
Is that right?
But it was when they got to Herod's song where the audience really came alive.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going with this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of that was the moment where the audience really kind of, felt, entertained. Because I think before that, everyone was kind of curious, trying to work out what their feelings were towards the show. But at Herod's song, that's kind of when the audience was, for some reason, that's when they got electrified. So yeah,
there's a great Herod in Rick Mail, a British comedian, sadly no longer with us, played Herod in around about 2000. There's a very good it's a film of a stage production, but with no audience. So they actually staged it for the cameras, and that production, I think, is a strong one, and it's done in modern. It's like when you see Shakespeare done in modern dress. It does it like that. But Rick Mail plays Herod, and that's a pretty good version. But for me, again, definitive. Whenever I hear the song, even if other people are performing it, I see the guy from the 1973 film with his pot belly and his kind of ridiculous haircut, and his ridiculous glasses, and the ridiculous swimming pool. I used to find it kind of difficult to laugh at because essentially he's mocking Jesus. It took me some years of listening to it to be able to disassociate myself from the content, as it were. Because if a musical is working, it's engaging your emotions. And my problem with the song for a long time was the complete disconnect between the utter jollity of the song and the utter horror of what's actually happening, which of course they don't do in the crucifixion, or even in the 39 Lashes. They're played not for comedy, they're played for just sheer trauma. But Herod's song, for some reason, by not having him engaging with Jesus, you can just about get away with it. But it's a risky move what they're trying to do there.
It is. And in the first production I saw of Jesus Christ Superstar, before the song begins, when Herod, aka Angry Anderson, is interrogating Jesus, he stops, he turns to the audience, and he says to the audience, he thinks he's God. And that
brilliant.
And that adds to the mocking. Now, what I remember at the time was it led to a huge outpour of laughter, kind of laughing actually with Herod, at the time. And I wasn't particularly religious at the time. So yeah, I kind of just went along with, silly guy thinks he's God. But it did add to that kind of mocking vein, which is probably more in line with the spirit of the song. But at the end of the day, you find out that Herod actually, he's one of the bad guys in this,
right?
And that's what I remember.
Well, that's part of the genius of casting Alice Cooper recently is that it's well known that the guy who plays Alice Cooper is a Christian, and yet he has this reputation, for being this kind of, hard as nuts kind of character. But when he walks on stage, and if I remember rightly, I've only watched it a couple of times, but he says something like "Good evening, Jerusalem" or something like that, and it was like, actually, that was like a, hair standing on end moment. I mean, so beautifully done, addressing the audience. Very clever.
Yeah, that offside thing. You mentioned the 2000 production. Is that the one where Pontius Pilate looks like a kind of Nazi outlaw motorcyclist?
Absolutely.
That was the weirdest looking Pilate. It was. I don't know how to describe it, but it looks like if the Nazis were outlaw motorcyclists. That's what kind of got the guy. I can't think of any way to explain it.
No, that's great. It's the same production that has Jesus is basically a real muscle man. Like he's sort of like kind of, and I don't know. I actually found that kind of quite an interesting casting choice. I mean, they probably chose the guy for his voice and his acting, and not for the fact that he was quite buff. But he's quite he's bare chested for lots of it. So it's not got my favorite Jesus in it. Maybe it's just because of the bulging muscles. I don't know. But
I mean, the dude was probably Jesus was a carpenter or stonemason. So I mean, I think maybe the dude was buff, all this kind of
nice one.
Maybe I often wonder whether the dude was buff, and those as we'd say in Australia, he was a tradie, so he's used to lifting heavy things and gets the job done, goes home, kicks back with a few beers or whatever they have down in. I know. Did they have beer in Nazareth? Or maybe he had a few. Maccabean beer, the Maccabee. Have you been to Israel? The Maccabee. Kick back with a few Maccabees.
Yes, nice. Or just have the red wine.
Yeah, maybe
flowing around.
Maybe. If you had to play one character, if in Jesus Christ Superstar, Mark, who would it be? I mean, if the Duke Religious Studies Department was putting on a production of Jesus Christ Superstar, who would you want to be cast as?
I would want to be cast as Thaddeus because he has no singing line whatsoever. I don't know. Basically, you would not want to hear me singing in that or any other context. If in a sort of parallel universe where I had the most gorgeous singing voice, then I think obviously the most interesting character for a male to play is Judas, because he's you've got a lot to do there with the vocals. You've got if you're a great actor as Carl Anderson is in the film, there's a lot that you can do with that. So I suppose it would have to be Judas, and also there'd be a kind of joy about a religious studies professor playing Judas Iscariot. I think it's like that because, of course, that's how some of our students see us.
Yes. Dr. Goodaker, or should I call you Dr. Judas? Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, being at a seminary, I don't get that too much. If I had to pick one, I would probably pick, and again, I do not have the voice for it at all. My wife took out a court order to prevent me from singing in public, and I'm only allowed to sing at church because of a particular dispensation, a clause in my contract. I think I would probably play Caiaphas, because I think he's got one of the best songs in the show. But you need a booming, deep voice for that.
Yeah, really deep. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like the guy. I think he was an African American guy, or maybe African British guy in the London production. He's a big dude, massive booming voice. That was good. I really like that.
But we haven't. I mean, talking of Caiaphas, we haven't really talked much about the depiction of Jewish leaders in the piece, and I must admit, I always feel vaguely, well, not even vaguely, actually guilty about my enjoyment of a piece that has got some quite troubling attitudes or depictions of Jewish leaders. I mean, like in our courses, we spend so long telling our students, the Pharisees were not all bad. The Jewish leadership in Jerusalem was probably not all bad. If you read the Gospels carefully, you can actually see there's a bunch of really sympathetic characters even amongst the leadership. And, we do all of this, and we go on and on and on and on about it. And then you sit down and watch Jesus Christ Superstar and think, well, okay, well, that's where they're getting some of the attitudes from. This is where they're getting the attitude. I mean, does that bother you when you engage with it, Mike? I mean, seeing, Caiaphas and Annas, who basically like fabulous characters in the same way that if you watched a great children's movie with two kind of baddies in it, but they're not sympathetic characters, and therefore people go away thinking that it can easily reinforce some of the worst sort of anti-Jewish stereotypes. I mean, does that give you some concern?
Yeah, it does. More so if they're dressed up to look like stereotypical Jews.
Right.
So
You're right.
So
yeah.
I think because there's nothing in the actual script that really emphasizes their Jewishness. It's not like they're going like, "Oy vey, what are we going to do about this carpenter from Nazareth?" So there's nothing in the script. I find it comes down to the visual presentation.
Sure.
And otherwise, it looks more like a political faction trying to dispense with a sort of political figure who they regard threatening to their base. So, like in the 2000 production, that they're dressed up more like, you'd probably say dressed up more like, how do you describe it? I mean, nothing particularly historical, or almost like, really evil. How would you call them? Commercial lawyers, to be honest, is how they're presented. So I think it comes down to how you address them. I think in the 1973 musical, they are dressed up in the sort of, priestly regalia.
So they look ridiculous.
They do look quite ridiculous, but
absolutely ridiculous. It almost throws me out of the. It almost throws me off being able to, because they look so stupid.
Yeah.
The only hats worse than those in the history of Jesus film is in Pasolini's Gospel according to St. Matthew, where they basically seem to be wearing waste paper baskets on their head. I mean, it's just absolutely, it's like, what was he thinking? Who told him to put those hats on? Like, anyway. But yeah, that's a good point. No, that's kind of helpful. I mean, there are still things. We need a more permanent solution to our problems. Just that line always bothers me because it just sort of, I don't know. So I
don't think Tim Rice was thinking about the final solution.
No, I don't think he was. No, he was. No, he wasn't. I'm certain he wasn't, because if he had have thought of that, he wouldn't have included that line. I'm sure of it. And also, even though, it was post-Holocaust and it was, in a post-Vatican II and so on, it's still the landscape has changed. I know that doesn't really excuse it, but I think the landscape has significantly changed since then. I mean, I have much more of a problem with Mel Gibson's take than Tim Rice's, because Gibson really should have known better, in the 21st century, doing this film. And actually, some of the tropes in The Passion of the Christ, I'm sorry, it's another film, but some of the tropes there play right into classic anti-Semitic stereotypes. And that
he was
troubling. Yeah, he absolutely was. Yeah, absolutely was. Yeah.
But that's one aspect. But that would probably come out in its own way in almost every Jesus film. Wherever you have a passion play, being that issue and that concern is going to be endemic. The way the Judean leaders are portrayed. I think in the Gospel of John film, I think they have a fairly good sort of caveat at the beginning of the film.
They do, yes. Yeah.
Whether that ameliorates or assuages all criticisms is another thing. But yeah, it's something you've got to be concerned with when a production of a Jesus film, how you're going to how the Jews are portrayed. But yeah, for my money, it's often how they're dressed that really gives. No,
it's a good point.
Yeah, which really portrays whether it's their Jewishness being emphasized or their attitude.
But equally though, Pilate is a more sympathetic character in this film than Annas and Caiaphas. I mean, he gets his own, it's not even Pilate's wife's dream, it's Pilate's dream. And then Pilate is this, his tortured soul. So, I mean, so you do still have that, but I suppose part of that is reading it directly out of the Gospels, where it's much easier to dramatize a tortured Pilate than a tortured Annas and Caiaphas. Because you've got the materials there in the text to do that, which is and a lot of writers of screenplays, they go, okay, I like this character because he's tortured, he doesn't want to send Jesus to the cross. And it's not necessarily because these people are thinking, oh, we've really got to have a go at these Jewish leaders. It's because they see the dramatic appeal of the tortured mind. But having said that, they should know better. That's basically still my view.
There have been some films which have portrayed Caiaphas himself a little bit more ambivalent about so that I have seen that creep into some films or some movies about Jesus. But okay, well, I think we're coming to an end of our discussion, Mark. If there was one thing from Jesus Christ Superstar that you would like, some of your undergrad students to take away from the phenomena, from the music, the movie, the various productions, what's the one thing you think they should take away from the phenomenon of Jesus Christ Superstar?
I suppose I would. Can I do two?
Yep, you can do two.
Okay, I'll do one which echoes something I've already said, which is, and I'm going to use your term, like interrogative Christology, no, shall we say that? But the idea that whenever you're studying these texts, it's quite exciting to be asking questions about. That's absolutely key. I love that. I love the fact that it grasps one of the fundamentals of both people that work in seminaries like you do, or in religious studies departments like I do. It's always about asking questions, right? It's all about interrogating the materials. So I love that. And I think the other thing which has probably very rarely been achieved as well as Jesus Christ Superstar achieves it, is to find a way of telling the Jesus story that is equally appealing to people from no faith background and people who are people of faith. And so you can actually have sitting in the theatre side by side people who will be the next day in church on a Sunday and people who've never been in a church in their lives except for weddings and funerals. That is really, really difficult to pull off, and somehow they managed to do it. And that's why it is still popular 50 years later, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I would say. I would say the Jesus story is still magnetic. People are still drawn to it. When you say 2,000 years later, 50 years of Jesus Christ Superstar, the Jesus story is still, what's the name of that movie? The Greatest Story Ever Told. Horrible film. Right, yeah. Horrible film.
It's got good bits.
Well, it's basically the Aryan Jesus, Mark. I mean, it's the...
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah. I mean... I know. Oh, I'm fully aware. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some good points, but, I just expecting Jesus with a German accent. That's the only thing he's lacking.
Yeah, I know. Well, he has got a Swedish accent, but yeah.
But he did make a good guy. The same guy was in Star Wars. So Jesus becomes a Jedi, sort of by the end of it.
Right.
But yeah, for me, what I take away from Jesus Christ Superstar, and people say, oh, look, people aren't interested in Jesus. No one wants to talk about Jesus. I say, well, Jesus Christ Superstar shows, if you tell the story right, if you put it up there, Jesus can still be a part of Western imagination, of culture, that interface between music, meaning, and religion. It's still possible. And, every time they put it on, it goes to sold out houses. Right. So that's the thing I take away. You can still connect Jesus with culture if you've got the right formula. That's what I take away.
I like that very much. No, I think that's very helpful. I mean, it always makes me smile when any new Jesus film or Jesus production comes out. They always use that line about the greatest story ever told. And in a way, the sad thing about so many Jesus films is that they don't fulfill the promise of that line. They'll say, oh, this great story ever told, and then you bore people to death. I mean, that's the problem with lots of these Jesus films. They're just so boring, And how have they taken such a fascinating story and such a fascinating character and managed to bore people? But Jesus Christ Superstar doesn't do that. So yeah, I think that's a great take, Mike.
Okay, excellent. Well, Mark, thank you very much for joining me. This has been a great discussion. Maybe one day we'll have to sit down and discuss all of the Lloyd Webber and Rice musicals. Maybe we can rate them one day.
Rank them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great talking to you, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
Likewise, pleasure.